He was Donovan Hawthorne, the titan of the logistics world, a man whose ambition was as legendary as his charm. At his side was always his elegant wife, Genevieve, the perfect corporate spouse who hosted flawless dinners and smiled demurely from the background. So when Donovan publicly left her for his young, ambitious assistant, everyone assumed she'd be left with a comfortable but ultimately hollow settlement. He thought he was leaving her in the dust of his magnificent empire. He never once suspected that the woman he was trying to discard was the same woman who had secretly built that empire from the ground up. He was about to learn that hell hath no fury, like a woman whose life's work you've mistaken for a doormat. The charity gala at the St. Gregory Hotel was the glittering apex of the fall social season, and at its center, as always, were Donovan and Genevieve Hawthorne. From the outside, they were a portrait of dynastic success. Donovan, with his sharp tuxedo and a smile that could disarm a hostile board meeting, moved through the crowd like a king surveying his court. He was the founder and CEO of Viridian Dynamics, a logistics and supply chain behemoth that had in less than 15 years revolutionized North American freight. He was lauded in business journals as a visionary, a maverick who had built his empire from sheer grit and genius. Genevieve, draped in a deep sapphire gown that mirrored the cool calm in her eyes, was his perfect counterpart. She was beautiful, but in a quiet, unobtrusive way. Her elegance was a backdrop to his brilliance, her grace a testament to his good taste. She managed their sprawling estate on Willow Creek Lane, organized their social calendar with the precision of a military strategist, and chaired fundraisers that added a philanthropic sheen to the Hawthorne name. To the world, she was Mrs. Hawthorne, a woman who had won the lottery by marrying a genius. Tonight, however, a subtle dissonance hummed beneath the polished surface. Donovan was holding court by the champagne fountain, his voice booming as he recounted the now famous origin story of Viridian Dynamics. And there I was, just a kid, with a beat-up truck and an idea. I slept in that cab for the first 6 months, living on coffee and ambition. No trust fund, no silver spoon. Just pure, unadulterated hustle. A few feet away, Genevieve watched him, her champagne flute untouched. A small, unreadable smile played on her lips. She had heard this story 1,000 times. With each telling, the truck grew more dilapidated, the coffee more bitter, the struggle more heroic. The part of the story he always omitted was where the money for that first beat-up truck, which was in reality a fleet of 5 brand-new vehicles and the lease on a small warehouse, had actually come from. Her gaze drifted to Donovan's side, where Brooke Jennings stood rapt with adoration. Brooke was his executive assistant, a woman 20 years his junior with razor-sharp ambition and a sleek blonde bob that seemed to defy gravity. She looked at Donovan, not as a boss, but as a savior, a god of commerce. And Donovan in turn seemed to soak in her worship, his posture straightening, his voice growing even more resonant. Genevieve had seen the way he looked at Brooke for months. It was the same way he used to look at her back when she was his entire world, back before she had become a beautiful, familiar piece of furniture in it. Later that evening, as their chauffeured car swept them through the city streets, the silence was heavy. "You were quiet tonight," Donovan noted, loosening his bow tie. He didn't look at her, his attention fixed on the flashing lights of the city he considered his own. "I was listening," Genevieve replied, her voice soft. "Your story gets better with every telling." He finally turned to her, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "It's what people want to hear, Jenna's inspiration. It's part of the brand." "Our brand, you mean?" she said the words hanging in the air. Of course, he said quickly, though his tone was dismissive. He reached over and patted her hand, a perfunctory gesture of possession. You looked stunning tonight, by the way. The perfect hostess. It was meant as a compliment, but it landed like a stone in her gut. Hostess. Accessory. Brand asset. The roles she had willingly played for 15 years, believing they were partners in a grand design. Now she saw them for what they were, a gilded cage she had helped construct around herself. They arrived home. The sprawling modernist house was dark and silent, a mausoleum of their shared history. As Genevieve ascended the grand floating staircase, Donovan's voice stopped her. Jen, wait. She turned her hand, resting on the cool metal of the railing. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, bathed in the moonlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment he looked like the man she had fallen in love with, the passionate, driven dreamer, not the preening CEO. There's something I need to tell you, he said, his voice stripped of its earlier bravado. Genevieve's heart, a muscle long trained in the art of stillness, began to beat a frantic, painful rhythm. She knew with a certainty that was as cold and sharp as ice what was coming next. She had seen the signs for months, the late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls, the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his suit jackets. I've been unhappy for a long time. He began the classic cowardly preamble. We've grown apart. We want different things. This life, it's not enough for me anymore. She remained silent, her expression unmoving, granting him no assistance, no emotional release. He faltered under her steady gaze. I've met someone, he finally choked out. It's Brooke, and I'm in love with her. There it was, the banal, predictable betrayal laid bare in their multi-million-dollar foyer. I want a divorce, Genevieve, he said, the words echoing in the vast space. He took a breath, his confidence returning now that the worst was over. He was switching back into CEO mode, the deal maker, the man who always came out on top. I'll be fair, of course, he continued, as if discussing a corporate merger. I'll instruct my lawyer to draw up a generous settlement. You'll be very comfortable. You won't have to worry about a thing. Genevieve finally allowed her expression to shift. The placid mask dissolved, replaced by a look of profound, almost pitying clarity. He saw her as a cost to be managed, a line item in the dissolution of their partnership. He believed the empire was his, to divide his, to grant her a small piece out of the goodness of his heart. She descended a single step, her eyes locking onto his. Donovan, she said, her voice no longer soft, but forged from something hard and ancient. You have no idea what you've just done. He mistook her words for a threat of an ugly emotional fight. He was prepared for tears, for screaming, for pleas. He was not prepared for the quiet, chilling resolve in her voice. Don't worry about your lawyer, Donovan, she said, turning and continuing up the stairs without a backward glance. I'll be in touch with mine. He was left standing alone at the bottom of the staircase, a king in a castle of his own, making utterly oblivious to the fact that he had never, not for a single day, held the deed. The law offices of Wolf & Associates occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a testament to the brutal efficiency of its senior partner, Gideon Wolf. Gideon was a legal predator, a man who smelled weakness like a shark smells blood in the water. He sat across from Donovan in a leather chair that probably cost more than a mid-sized car, a portrait of carnivorous confidence. It's straightforward, Donovan, Gideon said, steepling his fingers. You're the sole founder of Viridian Dynamics. The company was established prior to the marriage. Not quite, Donovan corrected a little too quickly. "We married the year I founded it, but she had nothing to do with it. She was a curator at some small art gallery back then." "Even better." Gideon grinned a flash of white teeth. "It establishes a clear pattern. You were the earner, the builder. She was the homemaker. The courts are predictable on this. We'll argue that the dramatic increase in the company's value is due to your unique and extraordinary efforts. We'll offer her a settlement that reflects that. Generous, of course, for her 15 years of service as your wife." He said the word wife as if it were a job title with a clearly defined severance package. Donovan felt a surge of relief. "What are we talking about?" "The house, of course. A lump sum payment, say 10 million, and an ongoing spousal support package for a few years to help her transition. 500,000 a year for 5 years. All told, it's a $15 million exit. More money than she could ever have dreamed of when you met her. It's more than fair. It's benevolent." $15 million. It sounded like a fortune, but to Donovan, it was a rounding error. Viridian Dynamics was valued at over $2 billion. He would be giving away less than 1% of his net worth to the woman who had shared his bed for 15 years. It felt clean, efficient. "Draw it up," Donovan said, standing. "I want this done quickly. Brooke and I—" "I understand," Gideon cut in, already waving his assistant in. "Leave it to me. She'll sign. They always do." A week later, the official offer landed on the antique mahogany desk in Genevieve's home office. She read the cold, formal language, the clinical dismissal of her life's work. "In recognition of her non-financial contributions to the marital union, a generous and final settlement waives any and all future claims to Viridian Dynamics and all associated assets." She didn't get angry. The time for that kind of raw emotion had passed the night Donovan had uttered Brooke's name. What she felt now was a cold, clarifying focus. He had not only betrayed their marriage, he had tried to erase her, to retroactively edit her out of their shared history and reduce her to a footnote in his heroic biography. She folded the letter, her movements precise. She then picked up her phone, not to call a divorce lawyer from the society pages who specialized in quiet, dignified surrenders, but to dial a number she hadn't called in years. The offices of Finch and Sterling were the antithesis of Gideon Wolfe's glass and steel palace. Located in a beautifully restored brownstone, they were filled with books, antique maps, and the quiet hum of intellectual rigor. Audrey Finch was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, behind a pair of unfashionable but practical glasses and silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She did not handle divorces. She was a specialist in forensic accounting and complex corporate litigation. She was known for her meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail and her ability to untangle the most knotted financial histories. "Genevieve," Audrey said, her voice warm but businesslike, as she welcomed her into a sunlit, book-lined office. "It's been too long. I was so sorry to hear about your grandmother." "She always spoke so highly of you, Audrey," Genevieve replied. "She said you were the only person she trusted to understand the intricacies of her estate." It was Genevieve's maternal grandmother, Eleanor Reed, who had been the source of the family's quiet, immense wealth. Not from oil or steel, but from shrewd early investments in technology, pharmaceuticals, and art managed with a discretion that bordered on secrecy. When she passed away, she had left the bulk of her fortune, a dizzying portfolio of stocks, bonds, and private equity, to her only granddaughter. But it came with a lifetime of lessons in how to manage it. Stay invisible. Trust no one completely, and understand that money is a tool, not an identity. Genevieve placed the letter from Wolfe and Associates on Audrey's desk. Donovan has filed for divorce. Audrey read the letter, her expression unreadable. She finished, took off her glasses, and polished them with a cloth. 15 million, she said softly. He considers that benevolent. He believes he built his company from scratch, Genevieve said. He believes I was a curator at the Wallace Gallery when we met, making $40,000 a year. And were you? Audrey asked, her eyes sharp. I was, Genevieve confirmed. I enjoyed the work, and it was the perfect cover. Audrey leaned back, a flicker of a smile on her face. The Nightingale Trust, she said, almost in a whisper. Genevieve nodded. The Nightingale Trust. The Nightingale Trust was Genevieve's secret weapon, the financial vehicle she had created under Audrey's guidance years ago, shortly after her grandmother's death. It was an offshore entity layered with shell corporations and intermediaries so opaque as to be virtually untraceable. It was the instrument of her silent partnership in her own husband's life. He's about to learn, Genevieve said, her voice dropping, the steel returning to it, that his entire origin story is a work of fiction. He thinks he's the author of his own success. The truth is, I was the ghost writer for the entire novel. Audrey Finch put her glasses back on. The forensic accountant, the corporate litigator, was gone. In her place was a hunter who had just caught the scent of her prey. So, Audrey said, a thrill in her voice, let's begin the audit, shall we? I want every wire transfer, every stock purchase agreement, every single dollar that flowed from Nightingale into Viridian Dynamics. We are not going to ask for a larger settlement, Genevieve. She leaned forward, her eyes glinting. We are going to prove ownership. Meanwhile, Donovan was celebrating. He had taken Brooke to a lavish dinner at a restaurant where reservations were a status symbol. He presented her with a diamond bracelet that glittered under the low lights. To new beginnings, he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. What about Genevieve? Brooke asked, her voice a little hesitant. Will she fight it? Donovan laughed, a confident, dismissive sound. What's she going to fight with? Her decorating budget. Gideon has it all under control. She'll sign the papers, take the money, and fade away. In a year, we'll barely remember her name. He raised his glass, utterly confident in his victory, completely unaware that hundreds of miles away, a woman he had long since stopped seeing was methodically preparing to dismantle his world piece by piece, document by document. The first salvo had been fired, but he had mistaken it for the end of the war. The real battle was only just beginning. The discovery phase of a divorce is designed to be a brutal campaign of attrition. Gideon Wolfe launched his attack with gusto, burying Audrey Finch's small firm in an avalanche of paperwork. He subpoenaed a decade's worth of Genevieve's personal credit card statements, bank records, and receipts, hoping to paint a picture of a woman living a life of idle luxury, entirely funded by her husband's genius. He wanted to show the court receipts from Chanel invoices for extravagant parties checks written to interior designers and landscape gardeners, proof of her non-financial contribution. What he got back was confusing. What is this? Gideon grumbled, staring at a summary his paralegal had prepared. He was on the phone with Donovan. Her spending is modest. Bizarrely so. Yes, there are household expenses, charity donations, but her personal expenditure is a fraction of what I'd expect. There's no profligate spending. Where did all the money go? I always just assumed she was thrifty, Donovan said, sounding annoyed. Her grandmother was like that. Old money, you know. They're weird about it. Does it matter? It matters because it doesn't fit the narrative, Gideon snapped. A jury likes a simple story. Hard-working man builds empire, spendthrift wife, enjoys the fruits of his labor. This story is blurry, and her own bank accounts, the ones from before you were married, show a significant starting balance. Her lawyer is citing an inheritance. A small one, Donovan insisted. Her grandmother left her some money, maybe a couple of $100,000, nothing that would have made a real difference. He was starting to feel a prickle of irritation. This was supposed to be simple. On the other side, the atmosphere in Audrey Finch's office was one of quiet, intense focus. The room looked like a historian's archive. Binders labeled by year lined the shelves. Each binder contained a chapter in the secret financial history of Viridian Dynamics. Audrey and Genevieve worked late into the night, fueled by tea and a shared sense of purpose. For Genevieve, it was a painful but necessary exhumation of her past. Each document told a story. Here was the initial wire transfer, dated August 2010. A sum of $2 million. It wasn't sent from Genevieve Hawthorne, but from a venture capital firm called North Star Holdings, a name she had invented one evening while looking at the sky. North Star Holdings was a shell corporation which was owned by another called the Albion Group, which was in turn an asset of the Nightingale Trust. The money had landed in Donovan's fledgling company account like manna from heaven. He had been ecstatic. "You won't believe it, Jen," he had shouted over the phone, his voice electric with joy. "A VC firm out of Delaware. They heard the buzz. They believe in me." He'd never questioned it. His ego was so vast, so all-consuming, that it simply accepted this windfall as its due. He was a genius, and of course anonymous smart money would find its way to him. Genevieve remembered the lie she had told, how it had tasted like ash in her mouth even then. "Oh, Donovan, that's wonderful. I knew you could do it," she had said, playing the role of the proud, supportive girlfriend. 2 years later, another crisis. A competitor had slashed prices, and Viridian was on the verge of a cash flow crisis. Donovan was panicked, on the edge of ruin. Then another miracle. A different entity, this one a European investment fund named Argentum Investments, swept in with a $5 million capital infusion in exchange for non-voting preference shares. Genevieve looked at the paperwork, now her signature on the internal Nightingale Trust authorization form, a stark, clear testament to the truth. She remembered Donovan's relief, how he'd wept in her arms. "We're saved, Jen. Someone out there has faith in me." He never noticed that both North Star and Argentum had no physical offices, no public-facing partners, and had dissolved shortly after making their single strategic investments in his company. Audrey was ruthless in her organization. "This isn't just about showing you gave him money," she explained her pen, circling a key clause in a loan agreement. "It's about showing control. Nightingale didn't just provide cash, it structured the deals. The terms of these preference shares the covenants on these loans. They were designed to keep the company healthy without giving Donovan unchecked power. You weren't just his bank, you were his board of directors, hiding in plain sight." As the weeks wore on, the emotional toll on Genevieve was immense. She would go home to the cavernous, empty house on Willow Creek Lane, a home paid for by Nightingale, and be haunted by ghosts. She saw Donovan as a young man full of dreams and a desperate, hungry energy she had found irresistible. She had fallen in love with his ambition, his vision. She had wanted to help him build it, but his pride was a fragile, towering thing. He had made it clear from the beginning that he had to be the self-made man. He couldn't be seen as taking money from his girlfriend and later his wife. So she had made a choice, to help him in secret, to become his twin invisible partner, believing that one day when they were secure, she would tell him. They would laugh about it, and he would love her all the more for her faith and her cleverness. But that day never came. Success changed him. The hungry dreamer became the arrogant CEO. Her silent partnership became a secret she was trapped in. He had started to believe his own press, his own heroic origin story. And she, in her quiet complicity, had allowed the lie to fester until it had consumed their marriage entirely. One evening, sorting through a box of old photographs, she found one from their honeymoon in Italy. They were on a balcony overlooking Lake Como young and impossibly happy. Donovan's arm was tight around her, his smile genuine, his eyes full of adoration for her, not an audience. A tear slipped down her cheek, a drop of salt water on the glossy paper. It wasn't just about the money or the company. It was about the life that had been stolen from her, the partnership that had curdled into a charade. Her grief, however, was not a weakness. It was a whetstone sharpening her resolve. He had taken that happy, trusting woman in the photograph and slowly, methodically erased her. Now she was going to reintroduce herself. The storm was gathering its clouds dark with meticulously documented truths. On the other side of the city, Donovan Hawthorne was growing impatient, planning his future with Brooke, oblivious to the tempest that was about to break. He was a man sailing in sunny weather, unaware that his ship was about to be reclaimed by the very ocean that had kept it afloat. Gideon Wolfe decided a deposition was necessary. It was a standard tactic. Put the opposing party in a sterile conference room for hours. Grill them under oath and hope they trip up, contradict themselves, or break down emotionally. He was confident he could dismantle Genevieve Hawthorne. He saw her as a soft, pampered society wife who would crumble under pressure. The deposition took place at Gideon's firm. The conference room was high-tech and soulless, with a panoramic view of the city that Donovan considered his kingdom. Donovan was present at Gideon's request to project an aura of power and control. He sat next to his lawyer, looking bored and magnanimous, a king granting an audience to a disgruntled former subject. Genevieve entered with Audrey Finch. She was dressed not in a power suit, but in a simple, elegant grey dress. She looked composed, calm, and utterly unruffled. She took her seat opposite Gideon, ignoring Donovan's presence completely. Her focus was absolute. The first few hours were a tedious recitation of facts, names, dates, addresses. Gideon then moved to the finances. Mrs. Hawthorne. He began, his voice dripping with condescension. Let's talk about your contributions to the marriage. You manage the household staff, correct? Yes, Genevieve answered. You planned social events, parties, fundraisers. Yes. You oversaw the decoration and renovation of your homes. Yes. All very important work, to be sure, Gideon said with a smirk. But you would agree that you did not participate in the day-to-day operations of Viridian Dynamics. That's not correct, Genevieve said calmly. Gideon paused, surprised by the direct contradiction. Donovan shifted in his seat. Oh, and what was your role? I was an investor, she said. Gideon laughed out loud. An investor? Mrs. Hawthorne, your bank statements show no such investments. We have them all. My personal bank statements would not show those transactions, she replied, her gaze steady. Audrey Finch sat silently watching the exchange like a hawk. Right, Gideon said, rolling his eyes for the benefit of the stenographer. Let's move on to the company's founding. You're aware, of course, of your husband's famous story, starting the company with nothing but a single truck and sheer determination. I am aware of the story he tells, Genevieve said, a subtle emphasis on the last word. And you don't dispute it. I dispute its accuracy, she said. Donovan could no longer stay silent. "What the hell is she talking about?" he muttered to Gideon. Gideon waved him quiet. "In what way is it inaccurate, Mrs. Hawthorne?" Gideon pressed, sensing a potential opening. He thought she was about to make some petty emotional claim. "Viridian Dynamics was not started with one truck," Genevieve said, her voice clear and precise. "It was started with a fleet of 5 new Kenworth T680s and a 1-year prepaid lease on a 20,000 square foot warehouse in the industrial park off Route 7. Donovan stared at her. His jaw went slack. He hadn't thought about the specific model of those trucks in 15 years. How could she possibly remember that Gideon was momentarily thrown? "And where do you allege the capital for these assets came from?" he asked, recovering. "It came from an initial seed investment of $2 million, Genevieve stated. "From whom? A venture capital firm called North Star Holdings." Donovan's head snapped up. Gideon looked at his notes. "Yes, the initial seed money. Donovan secured that investment himself through his relentless networking and a brilliant business plan." "Is that what he told you?" Genevieve asked, turning her eyes on Donovan for the first time. Her gaze was not angry or hurt, but filled with a sort of clinical pity. It unnerved him more than any outburst could have. She turned back to Gideon. "Ask my husband under oath to name a single human person he ever met from North Star Holdings. Ask him for a phone number, an email address, or the physical address of their office." Gideon looked at Donovan, who was suddenly pale. "It was all done remotely," Donovan stammered. "They were based in Delaware. It was a different time, all very standard for venture capital." Audrey Finch chose this moment to speak for the first time. "Actually," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "that's highly non-standard. A $2 million seed investment would at minimum involve multiple face-to-face meetings, extensive due diligence on the management team, and a seat on the board for the investor. None of which ever happened." Gideon felt the first real tremor of unease. "What are you implying, Ms. Finch?" "We are not implying anything," Audrey said, opening a single slim file folder she had brought with her. "We are stating facts. Let's move to 2012. Viridian was facing a liquidity crisis. Is that correct, Mr. Hawthorne?" she asked, directing the question to Donovan. Donovan, flustered, looked at Gideon, who gave a slight nod. "There were market pressures," Donovan said carefully. "We weathered them." "You weathered them?" Audrey pressed, with a $5 million capital infusion from a European fund called Argentum Investments in exchange for non-voting preference shares. "Is that also correct?" "Yes," Donovan said, his confidence returning slightly. "They saw the long-term value. They approached us." "Again, Mr. Hawthorne," Audrey said, her tone deceptively mild. "Can you name a single person you ever dealt with at Argentum? Did you ever visit their offices in Geneva?" Donovan's face was now a mask of confusion and anger. "No, it was handled through an investment bank. This is ridiculous. What is the point of this?" Audrey Finch slid a single piece of paper across the polished table to Gideon Wolfe. "The point, Mr. Wolfe, is this." Gideon picked it up. It was a corporate registration document from the island of Nevis. It showed that North Star Holdings and Argentum Investments, despite being registered in different hemispheres and at different times, shared a single common director. "And who is this director?" Gideon asked, though a cold dread was beginning to pool in his stomach. "That," Audrey said, "is a question we are saving for the courtroom. This deposition is over." She stood up. Genevieve stood with her, her composure absolute. She walked out of the room, without a backward glance at the man she had spent 15 years building up, who now sat staring at a piece of paper as if it were written in an alien language. "What was that?" Donovan demanded, his voice shaking with a rage born of fear. "What the hell was that?" Gideon Wolfe looked at the name of the director on the paper. It was a name he didn't recognize, some obscure functionary in a Caribbean law firm. But he was a good lawyer, a shark who knew the scent of blood. And right now, for the first time in a long time, he was afraid the blood might be his own. He was starting to realize he wasn't just fighting a bitter ex-wife. He was fighting a ghost, a phantom financier with a 15-year head start and a meticulously kept ledger. The simple story he had planned to tell a judge had just been shredded, and he had no idea what the new one was going to be. The courtroom was a theater of quiet hostility. On one side sat Donovan Hawthorne, flanked by the formidable Gideon Wolfe and a team of junior associates. Donovan had tried to project an image of calm authority, but a vein pulsed in his temple, a visible sign of the anxiety thrumming beneath his bespoke suit. His new fiancée, Brooke Jennings, sat in the front row of the public gallery, her expression a mixture of support and nervousness. She had traded her assistant's blazers for the demure pastels of a future corporate wife. On the other side sat Genevieve, a portrait of serenity next to the unassuming Audrey Finch. There were no junior associates, no phalanx of lawyers. There was only the two of them, and a set of thick leather-bound binders resting on their table. The first few days of the hearing were dry, procedural. Gideon Wolfe laid out his case. Donovan Hawthorne, the singular genius. He presented Viridian's spectacular growth charts, media clippings, praising Donovan's vision and expert testimony on his indispensable role as CEO. He painted Genevieve's contribution as purely domestic valuable in its own way, but legally distinct from the creation of the corporate empire. Then it was Audrey Finch's turn. "The petitioner calls Mr. Donovan Hawthorne to the stand," she said, her voice resonating with quiet authority. Donovan strode to the witness box, a flicker of his old confidence returning. He was on his home turf now, ready to tell his story, the one that had captivated investors and journalists for years. Audrey approached not with aggression, but with an almost academic curiosity. "Mr. Hawthorne, we've all heard the legend of how you built your $2 billion company. Could you please tell the court in your own words the story of the founding of Viridian Dynamics?" Donovan settled in, launching into the familiar narrative. "I started with nothing but an idea and a willingness to outwork everyone. I bought an old truck, slept in the cab, made sales calls from payphones. It was the definition of a bootstrap operation." "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. A truly inspiring story," Audrey said, her tone flat. "Let's talk about that old truck. Was it in fact an old truck, or was it a fleet of 5 brand-new Kenworth T680s? Gideon Wolfe shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance." "It is relevant to the foundational capitalization of the asset at the center of this dispute, Your Honor," Audrey countered smoothly. "It speaks to the very bootstrap narrative Mr. Hawthorne is presenting as fact." "Overruled," the judge grunted. "Answer the question, Mr. Hawthorne." Donovan hesitated. "It may have been more than one vehicle," he mumbled. "It was a long time ago." "It was 5, was it not?" Audrey pressed. "And you didn't just have trucks. You had a prepaid lease on a warehouse. All told, your initial capital assets were in the neighborhood of $2 million. Is that correct?" "I secured a seed investment," Donovan said defensively, "from a venture capital firm, North Star Holdings." "Ah, yes. North Star Holdings, Audrey said, walking to her table and picking up the first of the thick binders. She handed a set of documents to Donovan the clerk and Gideon Wolfe. I have here the incorporation documents for North Star Holdings registered in Delaware, and the wire transfer confirmation for $2 million into the initial Viridian Dynamics corporate account. Please confirm these are the documents related to your seed investment. Donovan glanced at them. Yes, this is it. This proves my point. Does it, Mr. Hawthorne? Audrey asked softly. You see, North Star Holdings was a shell corporation. It had no employees, no office, no other investments. It was created on July 1st, 2010, and it was dissolved on September 30th, 2010, just 2 weeks after the funds were transferred to you. A murmur went through the courtroom. Gideon's face was like stone. It was a special purpose vehicle, Donovan ad-libbed, grasping at financial jargon. Common practice. Common practice, perhaps, Audrey conceded. But let's look at who owned it. She produced another document. North Star Holdings was wholly owned by another entity, a UK-based firm called the Albion Group. Are you familiar with them? No, Donovan said, his voice now barely a whisper. And the Albion Group, Audrey continued, her voice building like a crescendo, was in turn a designated asset of a trust established in 2009. Are you familiar with something called the Nightingale Trust, Mr. Hawthorne? Donovan stared at her blankly. The name meant nothing to him. No. Audrey turned to face the judge. Your Honor, the Nightingale Trust was the sole source of the $2 million that founded Viridian Dynamics. Gideon Wolfe was on his feet again. Objection. This is speculation. She has not established who controls this trust. I am about to, Your Honor, Audrey said. She turned back to a terrified-looking Donovan. Let's move forward 2 years to 2012. You faced a cash flow crisis, and you were saved by a $5 million infusion from a Swiss entity called Argentum Investments. Is that correct? Yes, Donovan whispered. Audrey submitted the next batch of documents. And as we see from these filings, Argentum Investments was also a shell corporation owned by the very same Nightingale Trust. And then again, in 2015, Mr. Hawthorne, the $10 million for your software development. That came from Pacific Rim Ventures, did it not? Another shell, another arm of the Nightingale Trust, and the $50 million for your fleet expansion in 2018, also from Nightingale, funneled through yet another entity. Every time your company needed capital to grow, every single time it was on the verge of failure or ready for a great leap forward, this mysterious Nightingale was there. She let the words hang in the air, a devastating indictment of his self-made myth. The courtroom was silent, captivated. Brooke Jennings looked as if she had seen a ghost. So let's ask the real question, Mr. Hawthorne, Audrey said, her voice now ringing with power. You stand here and claim this $2 billion empire is the result of your singular genius. But the truth is, you were never the bootstrap entrepreneur. You were the recipient of over $87 million in strategic, perfectly timed investments from a single silent benefactor. Is that not the case? Donovan was speechless. He looked at Gideon for help, but his lawyer's face was ashen. Who is Nightingale? The judge finally asked. Leaning forward, her eyes narrowed. Audrey Finch paused, allowing the tension to reach its absolute peak. She turned and looked at Genevieve, who met her gaze with a calm, steady nod. Then Audrey turned back to the court. Your Honor, I would like to call my final witness to explain the nature of the Nightingale Trust. "And who would that be?" the judge asked. Audrey smiled a thin, triumphant smile. "The trust's sole founder, trustee, and beneficiary, Mrs. Genevieve Hawthorne." A collective gasp swept through the room. Donovan's head whipped around to stare at his wife. His wife, whom he had considered a decorative, financially illiterate accessory. He looked at her as if for the first time, and the serene, familiar face was suddenly that of a complete and terrifying stranger. The woman he had tried to discard for $15 million was not just a partner in his life. She was the secret owner of his entire world, and he had just dragged her into court to prove it. The moment Audrey Finch uttered Genevieve's name, the courtroom seemed to tilt on its axis. The air crackled with stunned silence, followed by an explosion of frantic whispers from the gallery. Gideon Wolfe sank back into his chair as if he'd been physically struck. Donovan remained frozen in the witness box, his face a canvas of disbelief, slowly morphing into dawning, abject horror. All eyes were on Genevieve as she rose from her seat and walked toward the witness stand. She moved with an unhurried grace that belied the monumental gravity of the moment. It was the same poise she displayed when hosting a charity ball, but now stripped of its social context, it appeared as what it truly was, unshakable strength. As she passed Donovan, he flinched as if her very presence could burn him. She did not look at him. She was sworn in her voice, calm and clear, a stark contrast to the chaos she had just unleashed. Audrey Finch began her questioning, her tone now gentle, as if she were merely allowing Genevieve to tell a long overdue story. "Mrs. Hawthorne," she began, "could you please explain to the court the origin of the Nightingale Trust?" "Of course," Genevieve said, her gaze directed at the judge. "In 2009, I inherited a significant portfolio from my maternal grandmother, Eleanor Reed. My grandmother was a very successful, very private investor. She taught me that wealth was a tool, and that its most effective use was often from the shadows. The Nightingale Trust was the legal vehicle I created with Ms. Finch's counsel to manage those assets according to that philosophy." Audrey let that sink in before continuing. "And why the secrecy, Mrs. Hawthorne? Why not simply invest under your own name?" Genevieve's eyes finally drifted to Donovan. The look was not one of hatred, but of a deep, sorrowful disappointment. "When I met Mr. Hawthorne," she began, "he was the most brilliant and driven man I had ever known. He had a vision, but he lacked capital. More than that, he had a fierce, almost desperate need to be seen as a self-made man. His ego was foundational to his ambition. Had I offered him the money directly, he would have refused. It would have wounded his pride too deeply. He needed to believe he had earned it from strangers who were awed by his genius." A low groan escaped Donovan's lips. He was seeing his entire life reframed, not as a heroic struggle, but as a carefully managed project, a play in which he was the lead actor, unaware that the playwright, director, and producer were all the same person, the quiet woman in the audience. "So you created this elaborate structure," Audrey prompted. "These shell corporations, North Star Argentum and the others, for the sole purpose of funding your husband's dream without his knowledge." "I did," Genevieve confirmed. "I loved him. I believed in his vision. I wanted to give him the world, but the only way he would accept it was if he believed he had built it himself. I became his tenant partner in every sense of the word. I wasn't just managing our home. I was managing the strategic financing of his entire enterprise. When the market shifted, I ensured he had the capital to pivot. When a competitor threatened, I funded the R&D to out-innovate them. The parties I hosted weren't just social events. They were intelligence-gathering missions to understand the market and identify his next need. Gideon Wolfe, seeing his entire case disintegrating, made a desperate last-ditch effort. He staggered to his feet. "Your Honor, this is an outrageous fabrication. She has shown no proof she is this Nightingale." Audrey Finch was ready. "On the contrary, Your Honor." She signaled to the clerk, who wheeled in a cart laden with the rest of her binders. "We have here every single internal authorization from the Nightingale Trust, every wire transfer, every stock purchase, every loan agreement, and on every single one of them." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "Is the signature of the sole authorizing party. I believe Mrs. Hawthorne can identify it." A document was placed in front of Genevieve. It was the authorization for the initial $2 million seed investment. "Is this your signature, Mrs. Hawthorne?" Audrey asked. "Yes, it is," Genevieve said calmly. "And this one, the $5 million infusion?" "Yes." "And the $10 million for the software development?" "Yes." With each yes, another stone was pulled from the foundation of Donovan's life. His face had gone from disbelief to rage to a ghastly pale dread. He was a king, discovering his castle was built on a sinkhole. The final devastating blow came when Audrey Finch presented the Trust's master charter. "And finally, Your Honor," Audrey announced, the founding charter of the Nightingale Trust, authenticated and notarized in 2009. It names the sole trustee and beneficiary with the unequivocal power to dispose of the Trust's assets as she sees fit. The name on that charter is Genevieve Reed Hawthorne. The judge stared at the document, then back at Genevieve, then at the crumbling man in the witness box. The legal reality was suddenly brutally simple. Viridian Dynamics had been built almost exclusively with funds that were Genevieve's sole, separate, premarital and inherited property. The funds were never commingled. They were never marital assets. Donovan had not built an empire and acquired a wife. He had been the manager of his wife's investment, a highly successful one to be sure, but a manager nonetheless. The empire wasn't his to divide. It was and always had been hers. "Mr. Wolfe," the judge said, her voice heavy with finality, "in light of this evidence, your client's claim to 100% of Viridian Dynamics appears to be fundamentally flawed." Gideon Wolfe could only stammer, "Your Honor, we will need to reevaluate our position." But it was too late. The truth was out a wildfire in the hushed courtroom. The reporters in the gallery were scribbling furiously, texting their editors. The story was no longer "Billionaire dumps wife for mistress." It was "Billionaire's empire was secretly bankrolled by wife he tried to leave with nothing." Donovan was finally excused from the stand. He walked back to his table like a zombie, his legs unsteady. He didn't look at Gideon. He looked past him into the gallery, at Brooke Jennings. Her face was a mask of shock and horror. The future she had envisioned, the life of a billionaire's wife, the status, the security had evaporated before her eyes. The man she had hitched her wagon to was not a titan of industry. He was a fraud, a man propped up by the very woman they had both dismissed. Her expression was not one of sympathy for Donovan, but of cold, hard calculation. She was staring at a bad investment. The empire had not just been challenged, it had crumbled its foundations, revealed to be a carefully constructed lie, and its emperor exposed as a man who never even owned his own crown. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Donovan. The court proceedings were swiftly concluded. The judge's ruling was a legal sledgehammer. Viridian Dynamics was declared an asset of the Nightingale Trust. Genevieve, as the trust's sole controller, was affirmed as its beneficial owner. Donovan was not left with nothing. The judge, in a ruling that some called ironic and others called just, awarded him a settlement based on his contributions to the growth of the asset. He was granted a lump sum payment that mirrored almost to the dollar the insulting offer he had first made to Genevieve, $10 million. Plus, in a final twist of the knife, the judge awarded him transitional support of $500,000 a year for 5 years. He was legally classified as the dependent spouse. The architect of the empire was pensioned off like a retiring manager. He lost more than the money. He lost his identity. The news story exploded across the financial world. Donovan Hawthorne, the self-made bootstrap hero, became a laughingstock, a cautionary tale. The man who had graced the covers of magazines for his vision was now the subject of memes and mocking editorials. His name, once a synonym for success, was now synonymous with delusion and humiliation. Brooke Jennings did not stick around for the aftermath. The day after the verdict, she quietly packed her things and disappeared from his life. Her adoring gaze had been for the billionaire CEO, not for the publicly disgraced, downsized ex-husband. A short, curt email was all the goodbye he received, wishing him all the best in his future endeavors. Donovan was forced to move out of the house on Willow Creek Lane, Genevieve's house. He retreated to a sterile luxury condo, the silence of which was a constant reminder of his fall. He was a king without a kingdom, a storyteller whose story everyone now knew to be a lie. Genevieve, however, did not emerge from the battle as a vengeful victor. There was a profound sadness in her victory. She had never wanted to destroy Donovan. She had only wanted to stop him from erasing her. In reclaiming her company, she was also closing the final chapter on the man she had once loved. She had a choice to make. She could have liquidated Viridian Dynamics, taken her billions, and retired to a life of quiet luxury. It would have been the easy path. But that was never her way. A month after the divorce was finalized, the employees of Viridian Dynamics received a company-wide memo. It announced a change in leadership. Donovan Hawthorne was officially out. The new CEO was a name none of them had ever heard associated with their company, Genevieve Hawthorne. Her first act as CEO was not to fire everyone loyal to Donovan, as many had feared. It was to call an all-hands meeting in the company's largest auditorium. When she walked onto the stage, she was met with a sea of uncertain, curious faces. She did not talk about the divorce or the drama. She talked about the future. She spoke with a deep, intimate knowledge of the company's operations, its strengths, its weaknesses, its untapped potential. She laid out a new vision, one that was bolder and more innovative than anything Donovan had proposed in years. She spoke of sustainable logistics, of investing in their workforce, of expanding into new markets with integrity. The employees who had been bracing for chaos instead found themselves listening to a leader of quiet, formidable intelligence. They saw that the real vision behind Viridian Dynamics hadn't actually left the building. It had just stepped out of the shadows and into the CEO's office. Genevieve sold the grand house on Willow Creek Lane, a place filled with too many ghosts. She moved into a chic, modern penthouse in the city, a space that was entirely her own. She worked tirelessly, not with the frantic, ego-driven energy of Donovan, but with a calm, focused sense of purpose. Viridian Dynamics, under her open and honest leadership, began to thrive in ways it never had before. She was no longer Mrs. Genevieve Hawthorne, the perfect corporate spouse. She was Genevieve Reed, CEO, a woman who had funded an empire in secret to protect a man's pride and then had to dismantle him in public to reclaim her own life. Her story became a different kind of legend in the business world, not one of bootstraps and bravado, but one of silent strength, strategic genius, and the quiet, unassailable power of a woman who had finally decided to sign her own name to her own masterpiece. That is the incredible story of Genevieve Reed and the empire she built in silence. It's a powerful reminder that the greatest strength often lies not in the spotlight, but in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Her journey wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about reclaiming her identity and her life's work from a man who couldn't see her value. What do you think? Was Genevieve right to hide her role for so long, or should she have been a public partner from the start? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of hidden power and dramatic justice resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a story where the truth finally comes to light. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into the most unbelievable real-life dramas. Thanks for listening.